Five, four, three, two, one.
Welcome to Our Voices. I have a special guest with me. He is Rusty Williams. He is no stranger to the podcast. Rusty, how are you today, man?
Doing really well. Thanks for having me back on.
Good, good, good. Rusty, we are 2 weeks away from Election Day, and it is huge. Uh, one of the biggest elections, if not the biggest election ever in our lifetime. And of course, we know what is going on, what's taking place in our nation. Um, but at the same time, there is something that we need to discuss on the home front in the state of West Virginia. It is about Amendment 1. This is something that no one has really talked about. And again, I came across this right here, and this is something that the folks here in West Virginia need to know. Again, either they don't know or they just turning a blind eye and deaf ear. I'm not accusing or assuming anything, but I want to bring this to the forefront so people can know what Amendment 1 is and whether they're for or against it. Rusty, before we go into our questions about Amendment 1, tell the people something about Rusty Williams.
I currently serve as the interim advocacy director at the ACLU of West Virginia. And since Amendment 1, the resolution passed and Amendment 1 made it onto the ballot, I've also signed on as the committee chairperson for Death with Dignity. So I'm actively working on the Vote No on 1 campaign, and that's been my main focus since the end of legislative session. But I survived a pretty gnarly bout with cancer back in 2012, and that experience put my life trajectory on a completely different path. And I've been laser focused on patient advocacy ever since then. And my main objective is to see to it that when folks need medical help here and they find themselves in life-threatening or just gnarly medical situations where they wouldn't have resources or help, I try to help them get those resources and get the help that they need. So that's what I'm dedicated to, and that's why I'm laser focused on seeing to it that we can shoot this Amendment 1 down.
Rusty, let's get this going. Rusty, Amendment 1, this is something that, well, for one, a lot of people don't like to talk about death. It's something a lot of people shy away from, including me. I shy away from it at times. I know this is something that we are going to have to um, we're going to have to face at some point in our lives. Tell the viewers about Amendment 1. And again, there's a website out there called Death with Dignity. And there's a website, deathwithdignity.org. So please tell the viewers about that and what should be done about that.
Well, essentially, using the most clear language that I can use, Amendment 1 is an attempt to enshrine a prohibition into the state's constitution, taking away the last free decision that a mountaineer and facing a terminal illness could possibly make. It's already illegal here in West Virginia, so amending this prohibition into the state constitution is, in my opinion, government overreach at best and state-sanctioned cruelty at worst. We pride ourselves here in West Virginia. Whether you are the most left-leaning person or the most right-leaning person, mountaineers are always free is something that we all agree on, right? Like that's a common thread throughout these hills. And, my opinion is that Amendment 1 flies counter to everything that we stand for here. It flies counter to everything we believe in. you touched on it there, before you asked the question about, just how difficult it is for folks to talk about death, right? Imagine how difficult it is for someone in a terminal situation, that has months to live, often in excruciating pain. Imagine how hard it is to have a legislative body tell you that although we know that there are compassionate methods out there for you to end your suffering and die in a dignified way, imagine knowing that those options are available, but not having access to that because of a legislative body decided to play doctor and tell you that you can't, basically force you to have to ride it out. It sets a dangerous precedent, and it's wrong for West Virginia. Amendment 1, if it passed, it's not going to change anything in patients' lives immediately, right? Like, it's already illegal to access medical aid in dying here in West Virginia. What it's going to do is tie future legislatures' hands. If the will of the people, if mountaineers decide that yes, we want to allow terminally ill West Virginians to access, this medical aid in dying program. We want folks to be able to die with some dignity. If we have this constitutional prohibition in the way, it makes things a lot harder. Passing a law, as hard as it is, amending the Constitution, that's an extremely heavy lift. So, it flies counter to everything we are.
Rusty, I'm looking at the map right now. It shows here that the legislation has enacted and amendment has passed in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 states.
Mhm.
And it shows here that West Virginia is under threat. Now, in layman's terms, when it comes to death with dignity, is it a sense of, like Dr. Kevorkian, like assisted, like the medically assisted suicide? Is it kind of like that?
No, and that seems to be, when I talk to folks, that I think that's where everybody's mind immediately goes. And while it is medically assisted, yes, you are getting a prescription, but that prescription has to be self-administered. There's no doctor that's going to, administer this medication in an IV or give you pills or whatever. You have to be of sound mind and sound body. You have to be able to administer this medicine yourself. And I think that one of the important things that I think is getting glossed over, especially on the talking points from folks who are supporting Amendment 1, 100% of MAID recipients are terminal. We're not talking about folks who are depressed or sick, and just may want an alternative, which is what the proponents of this amendment are actually pushing. And to me, saying that you can just be depressed and go to one of these 10 states plus Washington, D.C. that have access to medical aid in dying, and a doctor will give you a prescription and you can just end your life, is a slap in the face to the medical community, right? Like, there's not a doctor in the country that's just going to hand you a prescription that will end your life because you're depressed. But that's the things that, they're pushing to sell this amendment. The reality is, we've got folks who are suffering with terminal cancers. There's all sorts of terminal neurological conditions, terminal cardiovascular conditions that really force you to die with no dignity, right? Like, you were talking about, and I keep going back to it. I know this is the second time I've touched on it, but talking about death is a difficult thing. Imagine if your only option is to lay there in a room with people that you love and people that, you care about and care about you, and they're watching you as you lose control of your bladder functions and of your bowel function, and you're in such pain that you can't speak. These are the conditions that folks find themselves in every day. And I think forcing folks to just ride that out, again, it's state sanctioned cruelty. And I can't think of another way to say it. Having experienced chemotherapy and knowing what that feels like, I was fortunate. They gave me months to live. And I beat the odds. I beat their numbers and I beat their projections, and I'm still here able to advocate for patients and advocate for folks who didn't get it and who didn't get through. And I just wish that some of these lawmakers would take the time to go and visit some of these folks and actually sit down and have conversations with them, and maybe they can see, exactly the situations that folks are trying to navigate. But just to put things into perspective, as of right now, there are 75 million Americans that live in jurisdictions with medical aid in dying, right? Like there's 75 million Americans that have access to this. But there have only been 15,000 prescriptions issued. And of those 15,000 issued, only 10,000 have been taken. Some folks change their mind. They're issued the prescription, they decide they're not going to take it, and they continue on with maybe other methods of treatment or whatever the case may be. It's a very personal decision. But you know, again, it's very important that people realize that this is self-administered. No one is going to come in and, it's not a doctor or a nurse or anyone coming in and administering this medication for you. You have to be able to do it yourself. And I think that's part of this conversation that it's important for people to know.
Now, I see here that 4 states are considering it. Wisconsin, I'm sorry, Minnesota, I'm sorry, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, and it looks like it's above Wisconsin. Was it parts of Canada? I mean, just 3 states, it looks like, according to the map here. Um, Rusty, people say that they are against it because they think it's inhumane, correct?
I've heard all sorts of different reasons. You know, to me though, what would be more inhumane? Um, Allowing someone who's terminally ill to decide for themselves when that suffering has gotten too great and too much for them to bear, and they can make their plan, they can speak with loved ones, they can leave with dignity and closure. Okay, that's avenue A, or you can go down avenue B and continue the prohibition, make folks suffer right up until they take their last breath, or you put people into such dire straits that they take their lives under some other means, right? And then you're dealing with family members that may find them like that, and it's just a cycle of trauma that perpetuates unnecessarily. This is something that we can compassionately do, right? This is an act that we can take to show compassion for folks. And I don't want to get off too far in the weeds in this conversation because again, it's not even discussed in West Virginia. It's not something that, is in the political wheel or political will of the legislature. They're not going to do this, right? So we're not even talking about something that has the likelihood of being implemented in West Virginia, at least anytime in the near future. And again, there's already a statutory prohibition. It's already illegal. It's really just enshrining this prohibition into our Constitution. It's going to make it harder for legislatures down the line to, bend should public will dictate the course here in West Virginia. So to me, it's government overreach. And there's a bigger conversation here. And I do mean to get in the weeds on this part of it.
Okay.
We have pretty abysmal vote turnouts in West Virginia, right? Like, even when our vote turnouts are good, they hover in the 40%, right? So we have a supermajority that is dictating policy here for the entire state, but that supermajority was elected by less than 40% of registered voters, right? And I think that Amendment 1 really speaks to the disconnect. I think it speaks to why we have so many registered voters that just don't participate, right? Like when I talk to folks, and you know how it is in these spaces, we're constantly advocating, hey, use your voice. You have a voice. Here's, citizenship is not a spectator sport. You got to get on the field. You got to play ball, right? A lot of folks, they know all that and they don't care because they think that it doesn't matter who I elect, they're not going to listen to me. And this really, when you learn how Amendment 1 made it onto the ballot, A terminally ill patient reached out to his delegate, Delegate Pat McGeehan, right? And hoping that Delegate McGeehan would push a pro medical aid in dying bill here in West Virginia, right? He was going through a terminal situation. The man was suffering. He reached out to a delegate for help. Well, his ask goes against the delegate's personal beliefs. So rather than trying to help him, Delegate McGeehan spent weeks trying to talk him out of doing it, right? Like trying to talk him out of seeking medical aid in dying services and basically writing out his condition. And again, I'm not trying to disparage him on a personal level. I understand he probably feels like he's doing the right thing and he was trying to save a life. I get all that. But what he was really doing was asking this constituent, well, I disagree, so I need you to suffer, right? From a patient's point of view, that's what he was asking this man to do.
Right.
Well, that man ended up going to Oregon and he went through the process out there. He was able to obtain a medical aid in dying prescription, and he made the decision to end his suffering on his own terms, and he died with dignity. He had to do it in Oregon. He couldn't do that here in West Virginia, where mountaineers are always free. He had to go all the way across the country to do it. But Delegate McGeehan took such umbrage to that now he wants to enshrine that prohibition into the Constitution, right? Like, and that really, to me, speaks to the disconnect. Here you have a constituent reaching out for help. And because it goes against your personal beliefs, you want to make sure that no one has access to that ever. I think that's a problem. That's a huge problem that voters should be aware of in West Virginia. And for the folks who are watching this, if you're watching this and you don't participate in the elections, I have a question for you. Like, are you happy? Are you happy with where we are in West Virginia? Are you happy that you have delegates pushing resolutions to amend the Constitution to take a freedom away from you, to take the most personal decision and the last free choice you could ever make as a terminal mountaineer, literally taking the last choice away from? Are you happy with that? It blows my mind, and I hope that the answer is no, and I hope that you'll show up on election day and make your voice heard. If you're like me, again, mountaineers are always free is not something that I say. It's not just a saying to me. That means more to me than anything else. I have it tattooed on my body, and it's been there since I was a teenager, right? Like, mountaineers are always free means something to us.
Yeah.
And Amendment 1 flies counter to everything we are as West Virginians. So if you, like me, believe that mountaineers are truly free, you'll go in on November 5th and you'll vote no. It should be an easy decision.
Rusty, as I'm sitting here listening to you talk about death with dignity, the one thing I could think of is the financial impact, to where if they say, you can't, you cannot take your own life, which means that you're going to be stuck. I hate to say this like this. You're going to be stuck in a hospital bed or in hospice, running up medical bills, and some way, somehow, it has to be paid for. So, and those bills are going to be left with somebody, and somebody has to take care of them. So, given the fact that West Virginia is one of the poorest states in the nation, do we want to add that financial burden to that family? Let alone, I mean, they're going to feel the heartache and pain of losing that loved one, but now they got to tackle the bills. Set aside, I mean, let's not forget the funeral, the burial arrangements, things like that, funeral expenses. There's the medical bills also, because they're going to want their money as well. So the one thing I can see, I see is maybe they want the patient and the families to stay on the financial hook of, you're going to pay these people before you go. And again, I'm not trying to sound cruel or anything. I mean, that's just my take on it, because again, this is something that is new to me because again, I haven't heard anything about Amendment One until recently. And again, that's why I'm bringing you in here to explain to the viewers, to the audience about Amendment One, because it's going to be on the ballot in 2 weeks.
Mhm. Yeah, and the financial implications. I mean, you're right. It's not an angle that I've think about this issue from. To me, I am laser focused on what's best for that patient, what's best for that patient's family. But you're right, there is a financial implication to this entire conversation. Whether or not that played a role into Delek McGeehan's motivation to put this on the ballot, I don't think it did. I really do think that they're the supporters of this really think that they're doing the right thing and prolonging life, right? Like I think that they're trying to show you how pro-life they are, but they're missing the forest for the trees because they're so damn pro-life that they don't care about the quality of your life. They don't care if you're suffering all the way to the end, as long as they can say, "Oh, well, we kept you here," right? And it's just really again, I can't stress it enough. It flies counter to everything we are as West Virginians. You know, I am a cancer survivor, right? I know what it's like to have to lay there. I was laying there in a hospital bed when they came in and told my mother, "Hey, you should call the family because we don't expect them to wake up tomorrow," right? Like, I know how horrible that is and how scary that feeling is. End of life decisions. My end of life decisions are mine and mine alone. Like, there's no politician in the world that should have any say at all in my end of life care or my end of life decisions. I equate it to the legislature practicing medicine again without a license. It seems to be the tone, under that gold dome. And to a patient, it's insulting. It's insulting to have a group of men and women in suits try to tell me what's best for me, right? And my patient care. And I realize this is an anecdotal story, but when I was going through all those chemotherapy treatments, one of the nurses recommended that I get a pet, right? Said it could be good for my mental state and, keeping me positive. So I got a kitten. And, my cat, she's my best friend, right? I've had her since then. And I had her at the vet about 3 weeks ago. And my work days have been completely just inundated with Amendment One stuff, so it's fresh on my mind. And I was sitting there in that vet's office, and I just had the thought, my cat means more to me than I could ever put into words, right? Like, she helped me find light when I was in the darkest situation that I could possibly imagine, right? Like, I love this cat. And had that veterinarian came out and said, "Rusty, we're sorry. Your cat has cancer. She's eat up with it. She's suffering." It gave me peace to know that I could end that suffering, right? Like, I could make the decision to end it. And my best friend that I've ever had in the world wouldn't have to suffer anymore. But on the flip side, if I go in for my yearly scan and they say, "Damn, Rusty, bad news. You've got cancer everywhere." Well, because of the religious beliefs of some of our lawmakers, I have to ride it out.
Yeah.
That's to me, it's state sanctioned cruelty. There's no other way to say it. Overreach at best, cruelty at worst. And there's a better way.
Now, I don't want you to do any name dropping, but you've been there in the legislature in both chambers. How many elected officials are they're not in favor of it?
Well, it passed pretty overwhelmingly. Um, and like most things in West Virginia, and again, we could have another podcast talking just about this. Most things happen along party lines. There's very, very rare instances that you see, good shining examples of bipartisanship. It's usually left versus right, one versus the other, and that mentality is why we're dead last in everything. It's why we keep sinking to the bottom, because everybody's so damn hell bent on standing with their team, rather than looking at and working with folks who may not look at the world the way you do, may not see things the way you do, but still can find a common ground, right? And common ground, common sense solutions that work for everybody. That's the government that I want to see. That's the government that I think we all want to see, right? Like people who are willing to sit down and have hard conversations about difficult issues and find common ground rather than, well, sorry, your team came up with it. It's a good idea, but I can't support that, right? And it's a Democratic idea or a Republican idea. I'm sick of all that. What I want to hear our lawmakers focus on are West Virginia ideas. And I think the only way that that's going to happen is if we get people out to the polls to send a resounding message that, hey, the status quo is not acceptable. The way that business is currently being conducted is not acceptable. The way that you are just completely disregarding the will of the people that you represent is unacceptable, and until people show up at the polls and send a resounding message that we're not going to take it anymore, the wheels on the bus are going to go round and round.
Rusty, looking at the map of West Virginia, let's look at it in two different sections, the northern part and let's cut it in half. Okay. Has there been a poll, like a survey taken as far as who is in favor of Amendment 1? Is there an overwhelming number of people that are in favor of Amendment 1? And which region, the northern part or southern part, that's the majority that's in favor of it?
The polling data that I've seen, the overwhelming majority of West Virginians, whether they're in the northern part or the southern part of the state, are against it. The data that I have personally seen, it shows exactly on paper what I was speaking to earlier. That Mountaineers are always free resonates across the board, across party lines, across the entire political spectrum. And most folks don't want the government coming in and telling them how to manage their end of life care. Most folks do not want the government coming in and telling them how to live their life at all. That's not who we are here in West Virginia. So, I think that when you go out and you talk to folks about Amendment 1 and explain to them exactly, what the implications are, most people are more than happy to reject that. And I hope that that's when we wake up on November 6th, that everything I've just said translated into a glaring victory for us and a defeat of Amendment 1.
I'm going to say this is not to bash a particular political party. In your opinion, is this because we're talking about pro-life? Pro-life on one hand, Mountaineers are always free. Do you consider a sense of hypocrisy on behalf of a particular party?
I mean, I have my thought.
Or would you say, or let's say this, people understand when it comes to terminal illness and they know what the end result is. They say, okay, Rusty, I know one-on-one, I agree with you. I'm with you, but I just can't go public and side with you. Tell me what you think about that.
I mean, we get a lot of that navigating the political process. That happens a lot. No matter what issue you're talking about, there's always going to be folks who stand with you silently, who's not going to come out and say anything because they're afraid of rocking the boat or causing too many waves. So that's just the nature of politics. But what I hope those folks understand is, it's not just Democrats who terminally ill Democrats accessing made and dying prescriptions. It's not terminally ill Republicans. It's like when you are faced with your mortality and it's time for you to check out, like politics, all this crap that we spend so much time arguing, like that's not what you're thinking about, right? Like, I mean, I can say with 100% certainty that when I was laying there, I spent most of my life chasing, status like everybody else, right? Like I worked 6 days a week in that tattoo shop, trying to make as much money as I possibly could. I wanted the nice car, I wanted the nice house, right? Like I was trying to do what everybody's trying to do. And when I found myself laying there on that deathbed, when they came in and said, "Hey, we don't expect homie to wake up in the morning," you realize real quick that all that stuff you're chasing doesn't mean shit, doesn't cross your mind at all. The only things you think about are the relationships you have with the people in your life that you love and that love you back, right? So when we're talking about death with dignity, you know, why would you want to traumatize those folks, right? I was traumatized watching my grandfather pass away. He passed away in hospice. My grandfather was like Superman to me growing up. I thought there wasn't a stronger, more capable human being on earth. You could have never convinced me that there was, right? And I watched him suffer right up to the last second that he passed away. And it was heartbreaking. It's an image that, I mean, he passed away in 2001, and I can see that image as vividly and as clearly today as I did back then. And who knows if he would have made the choice had he had access to medical aid and dying prescription when he was going through that. Who knows? But as a patient advocate, like it breaks my heart that he didn't have that option, right? And I think that again, like I can't stress it enough that this issue is not partisan. It doesn't, like, cancer never one time asked me what my political affiliation was. It didn't ask me if I'd voted in the last election. It didn't care. It just showed up and tried to kill me, right? And this is the reality for terminally ill West Virginians all across this state. And I think enshrining a prohibition into our Constitution, effectively taking away the last free choice they get to make as a mountaineer, is absolutely counter to everything we believe and everything we are.
One last question, Rusty. What is the cost of doing this?
I don't believe I saw a fiscal note make its way through the legislative process when the resolution was being pushed. That's a great question. It's a question that I don't have a definite answer for you. I
Because
can't speak to the cost. The human cost is again, it's we're adding suffering to the mix, right? Like when we don't have to do that. And again, this isn't even something that we're discussing. It's not something that we could pass in West Virginia right now. Even if public will, if 90% of registered voters in West Virginia decided to all pick a day and show up in Charleston and rally in the streets, like, do I think that would move our legislature to enact medical? No. No, again, they don't care what we want. They don't care what's in our best interest. They only care about serving, their supporters. And it's really an unfortunate situation here, especially again when you're talking about a state with some of the highest cancer rates in the country. I grew up in Chemical Valley. Most everyone I know that passed away from the neighborhood and the area that I grew up in, and this is no exaggeration, most all of them died of some weird cancer, right? And all of them, every one of them had to suffer until they took their last breath, every single one of them. And it's inhumane. We can do better.
Rusty, let's end with this right here. I'm gonna give you the last word.
The last word, again, I've probably said it 4 times here, and I'm going to keep saying it because I think it's really important. If you're looking at the lay of the land, if you're standing back and you're trying to, see the big picture, if you're happy with the way things are in West Virginia, if you're happy with our education outcomes, you're happy with the shape of our infrastructure, you're happy with our healthcare incomes or outcomes, you're happy watching neighboring states grant access to things like reproductive health care and cannabis reform and all that. If you're happy watching states around us progress while West Virginia sinks further and further into the dark, then yeah, stay home on election day. But if you, like me, think that we deserve better in West Virginia and we can have better in West Virginia, I beg you, make a plan to get out there on election day and get 5 of your friends to follow suit. And if you believe, like me, that Mountaineers are always free, you will absolutely go in there and vote no on Amendment 1.
Rusty Williams from the ACLU. Hey, man, thanks a lot. You take care, okay?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Don't want to hold on.